History has shown a trend that has overthrew three significant regimes in the previous 250 years. Additionally, as of 2025, the US is adhering to that identical pattern, step by step, grievance by grievance, nearly like the script we're reading was written in anarchy and blood. France in 1789 was Europe's most powerful country, rich, sophisticated, cultured, and in just 5 years, they toppled the government. The monarch was decapitated and the nation fell. 40,000 people were plunged into the horror, put to death for political offenses. 1917, the Russian Empire was enormous. Tsar made the decision, 180 million individuals. The military had only served in the First World War and the 8th months the dictatorship came to an end. Tsar was put to death. The Bolsheviks seized. 20 million people would perish in the civil conflict and subsequent purges. Cuba was a thriving Caribbean nation in 1959. Country, American visitors, gambling establishments, a healthy economy. Additionally, in 2 years, Fidel Castro toppled the government, nationalized all of it, and made transforming the nation into a communist dictatorship that continued for 60 years. Three times during revolutions when a administration that appeared stable fell apart into anarchy, and each time the individuals in charge never anticipated it. They believed they were untouchable. They believed there would never be a peasant uprising. They believed that the system was too powerful to tumble. Every single one of them was incorrect. Time. And at this moment, each caution indication that came before those three revolutions is in the United States. The wealth, disparity, corruption in the government, the decline in trust in establishments, the anger that is simmering beneath the surface. We're not in the direction of the pattern. We're in phase 4. History also indicates that stage 5 and 6 arrive quickly. This is the tale of why governments exist and how revolutions occur, never anticipate them, and why the math claims that we are the next. Prior to going through the trend, you must comprehend what, in fact, it is a revolution, not a demonstration, nor political change, nor a riot. A revolution occurs when the status quo is totally destroyed and swapped out for something fresh, frequently worse. Revolutions don't occur because individuals are impoverished, and poverty has persisted throughout history of humanity. Revolutions take place when people's expectations surpass reality, feel they are worthy of more than what they have, when the distance between the elites and everyone else turns into sufficiently severe that the social compact is broken. Above all, when individuals lose trust that the system is capable of fixing itself, that the courts, the government, and the elections, any of it, will deal with their complaints. When nonviolent change turns into violent, revolution becomes unfeasible, unavoidable. That theory isn't radical. John F. Kennedy said just that. People who carry out nonviolent revolutions, violent revolution is unattainable, unavoidable, and history demonstrates it each and every, just once. Cuba, Russia, and France. Three distinct centuries, viewpoints, but the identical 6-stage order. Let's examine how it works in reality, played out. Let's begin with the mother. France of all the modern revolutions, 1789. France served as the focal point of European culture. Paris was the global center of culture. French was the diplomatic language. The arts, science, and philosophy are both thriving. The throne was occupied by King Louis XVI. France had been ruled by the monarchy for 800 years. It appeared unchangeable and eternal. However, the rot underneath was total. This is the initial phase of each revolution. Extreme disparity in wealth. There were 27 million inhabitants in France in 1789, split up into 3 estates. The initial 10% of the estate was owned by the clergy, land, and made no tax payments. The second estate, 400,000 or so, the nobles, 25% of the land was held by humans who paid virtually no taxes. The third class, 26 million peasants, everyone else. The middle class and laborers possessed 65% of the land and fulfilled all tax obligations. Let's that become apparent. 1.5% of the total population didn't pay taxes, yet 98.5% had the whole load. It went beyond taxation, too. The aristocracy enjoyed privileges. They could hunt on property owned by peasants. They might insist on work. They resided in palaces while peasants went hungry. By 1788, a poor crop prompted a surge in bread costs. Bread was 88% of the income of a peasant, when costs doubled, preventing them from eating. However, the nobility continuing to consume 5 courses, lunches continuing to host extravagant events at Versailles. The disparity between the wealthy and no one else was only economic. It was a total detachment from reality. Stage 2 of government corruption is this, and incapacity. The 16th King Louis was not malevolent. He felt weak and unsure of himself. Fighting wars had left France bankrupt, included supporting the United States in the War of Revolution. The state owed billions. Louis's solution to take out more, increase peasant taxes, reduce nothing. The nobles declined to pay taxes. The clerics declined. Additionally, when Louis attempted to change, they stopped him because those in positions of authority would I would rather watch the nation burn than give up their advantages. Does that sound familiar? France was in trouble in 1789. The government was unable to settle its debts. The food was out of reach for many. Additionally, Louis, known as the General Estates, a assembly of representatives that had not convened 175 years from now. He believed it would make new taxes legitimate. Rather, it became into the spark. This is the third stage. The middle class shattered and radicalized. The third estate, which comprised not only peasants, but also attorneys, business people, and middle-class educated people, demanded equitable participation. They desired one vote for each individual, not one vote for each estate, which provided the aristocracy. And clergy a 2-to-1 advantage. Louis declined. Thus, on June 17, 1789, the Third Estate proclaimed itself the National Assembly. They took a tennis court and locked themselves inside, and promised to stay until France had a constitution. This is the time when middle-class, educated individuals. The system turn should be supported by who? In opposition to it, when attorneys and business people claim that the government is not legitimate, at that point, revolution turns into unavoidable. July 14, 1789, Parisians overran the Bastille jail, a representation of regal power. The guards were killed by them, rode pikes, and paraded their heads through the streets. The revolution was underway, and it escalated quickly. Stage 4 is this: loss of trust in organizations. The monarchy, the courts, and the church both lost validity. The National Assembly eliminated feudalism, took control of church properties, proclaimed human rights. However, it wasn't sufficient. The radicals continued to pushing. Phase 5, revolutionary, mass support for the movement. The Robespierre's Jacobins wanted more drastic measures. They desired to carry out the king, redistribute all riches, and eliminate the revolution's adversaries, and they garnered public favor because the moderates had fallen short. The food was still in short supply, and the economy remained still in short supply, and blood was sought after. January 21st, 1793, Louis V, King XVI, was publicly decapitated by guillotine. Maria Antoinette, his wife, came next in October, and the horror started. Stage 6, overthrow of the government. Anarchy comes next. Between 1793 and 1794, the Public Safety Committee, headed by Robespierre, put 40,000 people to death. Clerics, nobility, political rivals, even other revolutionaries who didn't share radical enough. It was referred to as purifying the revolution. It was a mass murder. In Paris, the public guillotine ran every day. Executions for amusement. Additionally, the purge continued to spread. Initially, the nobles, followed by the middling revolutionaries, followed by anyone charged with counter-revolutionary ideas. No trial, death, accusation, and no proof. Robespierre was ultimately put to death by the same mechanism he developed, because revolutions eat their own offspring, always. France was weary by 1799. 10 years of turmoil, financial collapse, conflict on every front, and Napoleon went on to become emperor via a coup. The revolution that started with freedom, fraternity, and equality concluded with a military rule that would impede Europe into a war that lasted 15 years. The lesson of France. Severe inequality plus ineptitude of the government, combined with the loss of institutions and faith, lead to revolution. Additionally, revolution results in horror, anarchy, and frequently despotism, worse than the previous situation. Let's now fast forward 128 years. 1917 Russia. Russia was a primitive empire in 1917. Tsar Nicholas II was in charge. The Romanov dynasty had been in power for 3 centuries, and Russia was a huge country with 180 million inhabitants, extending from the Pacific to Europe. However, behind the regal exterior, the same decay. Stage 1, extreme riches, disparity. The nobles and czar owned everything. 80% of the peasants' population had nothing. They had been liberated from serfdom in 1861, yet the most continued to farm aristocrats' land, paying rent that was beyond their means. Within the cities, laborers in factories worked 12, 14 hours a day for earnings equivalent to famine. Youngster, work was widespread. Rules for safety didn't exist. The czar, meanwhile, lived inside palaces. Balls were hosted by the nobles. That was more expensive than what a peasant would make, once in a lifetime. The disparity wasn't only economical. It was medieval, feudal, and not sustainable. Stage 2, government, incapacity and corruption, Tsar. Nicholas II was a catastrophe, weak, undecided, and utterly disconnected with reality. He had faith in divine, correct that he was selected by God to reign, thus there was no need for reform. When laborers marched non-violently in 1905, Winter Palace to request improved circumstances, his guards opened fire. Hundreds of people were killed. Sunday is bloody. It's shattered all lingering trust that the Tsar was concerned for his people. Then arrived. Russia joined the First World War in 1914, and it was a disaster. Millions of impoverished troops with equipment sent to perish. Officers were not capable. Lines of supply fell apart. Soldiers engaged in combat without bullets. Whole divisions gave up since they lacked ammunition. By 1917, Russia has endured 3 million deaths. The army was disbanding. The economy was in ruins. Additionally, the Tsar, nevertheless enjoying a luxurious lifestyle and earning choices based on Rasputin's counsel, an influential mystical holy guy above the arena, bred in February 1917, riots in St. Petersburg's Petrograd. Women began to protest in bread lines. They were joined by workers. The military was summoned in to bring the peace back, but the troops declined to shoot the masses. They rebelled. Phase 3. Middle class and military revolt against the government. When the military refuses to protect you, the government is over. Russia's Duma. Nicholas was ordered to step down by parliament, and he did on March 15, 1917. Following, the Romanov dynasty ended after 300 years, not with a whimper, but with a war. A temporary administration was established, headed by Kinsky Alexander. Reforms were promised, a constitution and elections. However, they produced a deadly error. Russia was retained in. The soldiers sought peace after World War I. The populace desired food. Additionally, the temporary administration delivered neither. Phase 4, loss of trust in establishments. The interim administration lost credibility in a few of months. They were perceived as feeble, incapable, and subservient to foreign powers. And into that void, Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks took a step. Phase 5, gains of the revolutionary movement, widespread assistance. Lenin made 3 promises, items: land, bread, and peace. Put an end to the conflict. Transfer the land owned by the nobility to peasants. Feed the populace. Easy, straightforward. The Bolsheviks has also constructed a disciplined revolutionary group prepared to take control. October 25th, 1917, the coup was started by the Bolsheviks. They broke into the Winter Palace, took the Lenin and the temporary government, proclaimed Soviet dominance. The procedure took less than 24 hours. Nearly bloodless, but what came next wasn't. Stage 6, government overthrown. The result is chaos. The Russian, 19,181,922, was the duration of the Civil War. The Bolsheviks against the whites, reds, everyone else, liberals, monarchists, and foreign involvement. The conflict was all out, and the Bolsheviks prevailed by brutal fear. The secret police, the Cheka, executed anyone who was suspected of counter-revolutionary actions. Whole villages destroyed. July 1918 saw the Tsar was put to death together with his whole family, shot and bayoneted in a basement, even the kids. The Bolsheviks by 1922 dominated Russia, but at a price of disastrous 10 million fatalities in the Civil War. Millions more died from famine. The economy collapsed. In Lenin's promises, peace entailed giving up. Germany in terms of humiliation. Land meant famine and collectivization. Bread meant famine and rationing. The revolution that delivered on its promise of freedom, dictatorship. Stalin might assume power, and 20 million additional people were killed in purges in 1924. And famines, Russia's lesson, when incompetence in government meets military, revolutionary organization meets defeat. In just a few months, the entire system might fail, and what takes its place is frequently even worse. Let's now examine the most current, Cuba, 1959, for instance. This particular one is distinct, as Cuba wasn't a primitive peasant culture. It was a comparatively wealthy nation in the 50s. Cuba had among the highest living conditions in Latin America, known as the Monte Carlo of the world, Havana, the Caribbean. Travel, gambling, and American investment. However, beneath the glitz, the identical pattern. Stage 1, extreme riches, disparity. The wealth was concentrated. Havana, and among the affluent associated with the government of President Fulgencio Batista, the impoverished rural areas, particularly in eastern Cuba, lived in poverty. Plantations that produced sugar controlled the economy. The United States, a large portion of the land was held by enterprises, the profits that left the nation or into a small elite's pockets. Rural Cubans, meanwhile, had no medical attention, no instruction, and no chance. The difference between the rural countryside and nightclubs were huge. Stage 2, government, incapacity, and corruption. Batista was a despot who came to power in 1952, coup. He called off elections and was in charge of decree, and there was complete corruption. It is possible to purchase police. The courts were manipulated. Opponents of politics were imprisoned or murdered. Mobsters in America controlled the casinos with Batista's approval, giving him a cut. There was a government to benefit Batista and his associates, nothing else. Additionally, when people objected, the reaction was covert and violent. Police, disappearances, and torture. This sparked anger, particularly in young people, Cubans with education who witnessed their nation being plundered. Middle class, stage 3, radicalized. Fidel Castro practiced law. From a family that was comparatively wealthy, knowledgeable, he might have participated in the elite, but he observed the misconduct and opted for revolution. In 1953, he oversaw an assault on the barracks in Manata. It's failed. He was put in jail. However, at his trial, he delivered a speech that would motivate thousands. History will clear me, he murmured. He was set free in a 1955 amnesty and traveled to Mexico to make a plan. Castro returned in December 1956 on a yacht named Grandma with 82 men. They touched down in Cuba's east. They were ambushed by forces. Just 20 people made it out alive and fled to the Maestro Sierra mountains. The majority of revolutionaries would have given up. Castro didn't. This is where the pattern quickens. The stage, fourth, a lack of trust in institutions. Batista's violence transformed the populace opposed against him. When the military elevated villages thought to be assisting, more rebels were produced by them. When students were tortured by cops, the revolution was joined by classmates. Castro's army expanded not due to ideology, due to the hatred of Batista and the U.S., which had backed. Batista began to retreat. When a foreign client deserts you, you're completed. Phase 5, revolutionary, mass support for the movement. By 1958, Castro possessed thousands of combatants. Every city has resistance cells, support from peasants who viewed him as their defender, and the army of Batista was collapsing. Soldiers left, officers ran off with pilfered cash. January 1st, Batista escaped to the Dominican Republic in 1959, republic with $300 million. Castro arrived at Havana on January 8, triumphant, stage 6, government overthrown. The result is chaos. Initially, Castro pledged elections, democracy, free press. However, in a few months the mask dropped. Opponents in politics were detained, tried, and put to death. The press was restricted, and Cuba turned into a despotism under communism. Castro nationalized everything. Factories, farms, and companies. Anyone who opposed was put in jail or put to death. Hundreds were captured throughout the first year. Thousands ran away. The middle class that possessed backed Castro because they detested Batista. They discovered too late that freedom is not the result of revolt. It's bringing in new despots. Cuba continued to be 60 years of despotism. Fidel was in charge, up until 2008. Raúl, his brother, till 2018. The liberation-promising revolution brought oppression and poverty, the Cuban lessons. Even in a comparatively developed nation, corruption and revolution can be sparked by brutality. And once in control, the revolutionaries turn into the new oppressors. 3 changes, 3 centuries, 3 nations. France, 1789. Cuba, 1959. Russia, 1917. Distinct settings, various beliefs, yet the same 6-step sequence. Let's dissect it, since once you see it, you'll comprehend why this is occurring. In the U.S. at the moment should frighten you. Stage 1, extreme riches, disparity. In each of the 3 situations, riches was centered on a small elite, whereas the masses had difficulties. France's nobility and clergy did not pay taxes. Tsar, Russia, and everything was owned by nobles. Cuba, Batista and his associates plundered the nation. The precise figures differed. However, the pattern remains the same. As soon as the 2,540% of wealth is controlled by the top 1%, when the wealth disparity widens to resentment that is overt and offensive constructs. This by itself doesn't result in revolution. Inequality has always existed, but it's the basis. Verify. Stage 2. Corruption in the government and incapacity. In each of the 3 situations, It was believed that the government was not legitimate. Louis XVI of France was unable to reform and continued to borrow. Nicholas II of Russia was unskilled and detached from actuality. Batista was corrupt in Cuba, autocrat, when the government's sole purpose is assist the ruling class. When corruption is evident, when incapacity results in crisis, people stop respecting power. Verify. Third stage, middle, class shattered and radicalized. This is a crucial phase. Revolutions don't begin with the most impoverished. They begin when the educated middle class becomes disillusioned with the system. France attorneys and business people headed the National Assembly. Russia, scholars and students joined the Bolsheviks. Castro practiced law in Cuba. His urbanites with education made comprised the supporters when those who ought to gain from stability turn against it. Revolution becomes probable. Verify. Loss in stage 4 of trust in organizations. When individuals give up on elections, courts, the social contract is broken. Cops. The Estates General in France turned into a revolutionary gathering. Russian soldiers hesitate to stand up for Thesar. Everyone, Cuba. I was aware that Batista corrupted elections. When institutions become less credible, when people think that the system isn't transformed from the inside out, they search for options outside of the system. This is the point at which there is no way back. Verify the stage 5. A revolutionary movement gathers traction, assistance. At this point, structured groups provide a substitute. France, Cuba, Russia, the Bolsheviks and Jacobins, Castro's July 26th movement. They pledge to uphold justice. They pledge to discipline the dishonest. They guarantee the future. And those who are anxious for change back them not out of love for the revolutionaries, due to their hatred of the current administration. Verify the stage 6. The government was overthrown. Anarchy comes next. This is the final product. The old order falls apart. King of France, beheaded, followed by fear. Tsar, Russia, millions are killed in civil war executions. Cuba, Batista escapes. Castro becomes into autocrat. And this is the internal pattern. The uprising never fulfills its promises. It provides new dictatorship, blood, and purges due to extremists are the leaders of revolutions, and extremists destroy rather than create. The reform-minded moderates, put to death or banished. The individuals who believe that freedom will come from revolution, they discovered too late how chaotic, worse than corruption. Let's chat now. Regarding the US in 2025, and the reasons, all the danger signs are blinking red. Extreme wealth inequality is stage 1. Verify. The richest 1% of Americans in 1980 held 8% of the wealth. As of this now, 32%, greater than France in 1789. The uppermost, approximately 130,000 households, or 0.1%, own more wealthier than the 90% at the bottom, around 117 millions of households. The distance between everyone is bigger than billionaires, more than at any point in American history, greater than that of the Gilded Age, greater than the 20s. You can see the wealthy, individual, space travel, airplanes, and super yachts, while homes are out of reach for the middle class. Either education or healthcare, whereas millions work several jobs in order to make ends meet. The anger is growing, and for good reason. Stage 2, corruption in the government and incapacity. Verify, have faith in Congress is 15%. The Supreme Court's credibility is collapsing. Half of the nation thinks elections are manipulated. Insider trading there are many members of Congress. Legislation is written by lobbyists. Politicians are owned by corporations, but nothing is completed. The infrastructure is deteriorating. At $36 trillion, the debt is still growing. Issues that need to be resolved aren't, since the government does not work for the individuals. Donors benefit from it. When both parties are viewed as dishonest and incapable, when voters think the confidence in democracy, the system is rigged, passes away. Middle class, stage 3, radicalized and destroyed. Verify. The middle class in America is disappearing. Out. The cost of college is too high. Housing is not affordable. The price of medical care is family going bankrupt. Wage growth is stagnate as asset values soar. And youth with education cannot attain the success of their parents. Their student loan debt is overwhelming them. Not able to purchase homes, are unable to have children, and they're upset. When attorneys, educators, engineers, those who ought to be, those that succeed are failing, they get radicalized. They search for someone to hold accountable. Additionally, they locate targets, the privileged, the system, the billionaires. Here's how revolutions begin, not with the most impoverished, with the educated who had higher expectations. Stage 4, a decline in trust in establishments. Verify, yes, we are here, right now. Media trust is at an all-time low. There is no longer any faith in the police. Have faith in elections are flawed. Half of the nation feels that the election in 2020 was rigged. The other 50% think that January 6th, the riot, was an attempt at a coup. On neither side has faith in the other. Both sides don't think the establishments are reputable. The people view courts as political. The FBI is regarded as political. Everything is visible from a partisan perspective. Additionally, when that occurs, when people lose faith in common institutions, the nation is no longer unified. There are two countries holding the same space and waiting, seeking a spark. The estates belong to France. Overall, Bloody Sunday occurred in Russia. Cuba possessed Batista's cruelty. America, it might be anything. An election that was contested, a financial crisis, a political assassination, a police event that becomes viral. The kindling is hence dry. All we have to do is wait for the game. We're at the 4th stage. History adds stage. Next is number 5. Phase 5. The revolutionary movement gets momentum. Assistance. This has not yet occurred. Not completely, but the parts are coming together. On the left, there is increasing backing for socialist policy, wealth, eat up the rich discourse about redistribution. There is increasing support on the right for strong men and authoritarianism, leaders and extracurricular activities. Both sides more and more think the system is broken beyond repair, that it must be demolished and rebuilt. As soon as the moderates become unmanageable, when the stage 5 extremes receive widespread backing is present. We're also closer than most. People are aware. The 6th stage is what nobody wants to consider because stage 6 is anarchy. 40,000 people were killed in France in the fear. 10 million people are dead in Russia during a civil war. Dictatorship in Cuba for 60 years. American exceptionalism claims this is not where it can occur. We're too steady, too democratic, too rich. That's what in France they said. Russia was a 3-century-old empire. Cuba was affluent, contemporary, and all three fell apart. The pattern is indifferent concerning uniqueness. So how does stage 6 seem in the United States? Nobody knows for sure, but history provides us with hints. Political violence increases rather than organized violence, rioting, assassinations, rebellion, and the armed forces, and police disintegration. A few units sides with the government, whereas others revolutionaries. Supply chains collapse, down, shortages of food and fuel. The economy implodes since nobody has faith in everything. States attempt to break apart or reject the authority of the federal government, and other forces meddle. China, they would love to see America burn Russia. The mayhem can go on for years. Millions might pass away. Additionally, what appears on the other, America won't be the same as it was before. It might be autocratic. It might be divided into areas. It might be worse. Stage 6 is that. And according to the pattern, once you're in stage 4th, it's really hard to stop. Three patterns, 3 revolutions. Cuba, Russia, and France. Every time the elites didn't anticipate it. Every time they believed they were secure. Every time. The peasants they believed would never get up. Additionally, the disparity between wealthy and impoverished, the corruption of the government, the lack of faith, all of which came together to create and blast that demolished the current order. The U.S. is in the stage of 4. The disparity in wealth is greater than France in 1789. The state is as dysfunctional as 1917 Russia. The institutional trust is as shattered as Cuba in 1958. Additionally, the pattern indicates stage 5 and 6 are on their way. Perhaps we can quit it. Perhaps we can change before revolution. Perhaps the system can resolve itself. However, the pattern indicates differently. History demonstrates differently. Additionally, there are caution signs everywhere. 3 times it took place. Every time they believed that they were distinct. Every time the pattern prevailed. If this caused your eyes to where we are in the real world, cycle, sign up. Due to the fact that stage 5 starts when the revolutionary movements acquire widespread support, you should comprehend what's going on and why. The future doesn't hold the answers. They were written in the past.